Alexei Navalny was not a good guy, but if all you've heard of him were his recent media obituaries, that's what you'd be led to believe. Fawning appraisals of the brave dissident, standing up to the evilest man in the world. But who was Navalny? None of these reports really shine much light on what exactly this politician's politics were. What did he stand for? And what would Russia look like had he toppled Big Vlad? We know Navalny only as symbol, as a hero walking the hero's journey, unshaken from his desire for justice, even in the face of death. Heroes like these serve as powerful cultural signifiers of resisting authoritarian rule. But for these symbols to mean anything, doesn't the person attached to the symbol actually have to be the good guy? Otherwise, aren't we just wasting our time rooting for a bad guy to beat another bad guy, and then we have to create yet another bad guy to beat that bad guy?
It was said that you would destroy this sin, not join them!
The limited descriptions of Navalny's political activism center around his anti-corruption work. It's no secret that Russia has a very corrupt system of government, and speaking out against it publicly is pretty much the leading cause of death for political activists in the country, so it isn't without risk and is a pretty brave thing to do. Navalny published blogs detailing the corrupt nature of relationships between Russian state agencies and oligarch-controlled corporations, using inventive strategies like buying shares in firms to gain access to private records, which he would then leak. That's honestly pretty boss. So he's anti-corruption. Okay, that's good. But let's suppose he takes power and magically weeds out the corruption and doesn't simply become the top dog overseeing the corruption. How would Navalny's Russia be organized? In 2000, Navalny joined the Yabloko Liberal Party. The word liberal here meaning tax cuts, privatization, deregulation, standard Western capitalist economics of globalization that began in the 80s. He was though ultimately expelled from the party in 2007 after giving speeches at far-right nationalist marches with neo-Nazis in attendance. He played up anti-immigration rhetoric, suggesting deporting all Muslims. His right-ward turn towards nationalism served him well enough for a while, but his platform's appeal was pretty limited to racist slices of the population, especially amongst the middle classes. If he was going to appeal to a broader supporter base, he had to tone down his association with ethno-nationalism, much in the same way Marine Le Pen and Giorgia Meloni had to sanitize their fascist origins. Heading into the 2010s, he pivoted towards the more palatable message of anti-corruption, exposing the immense wealth of Putin and the oligarch class, which started to resonate with larger swaths of the working class. He would also begin to receive international attention from Western governments supporting his pro-democracy anti-corruption platform that undermined the Putin regime. Navalny and his allies took care to distance his image from his racist affiliations, while not abandoning anti-immigrant Islamophobia altogether, so as not to lose support from the far right. But whenever his past was brought up, he would be described as a different man now. It's hard to believe though that someone who once released a campaign ad titled Pest Control, in which he compares Muslims to cockroaches and then shoots one who bursts into his studio, could now be a completely different person. But that was the message. Navalny is a new man with new values. I think though the real takeaway is that we can't be certain of exactly who Navalny was. We know he originally had a commitment to neoliberal economics that would be looked upon very favorably by Western corporations, looking for growth in a huge market they've been locked out of, with Russian natural resources tightly controlled by national oligarchs loyal to the Putin regime. His subsequent evolutions towards nationalism, xenophobic rhetoric, and finally anti-corruption pro-democracy should be taken as indications he was not necessarily an ideological activist, but a political opportunist. His talent was he was a shapeshifter who could be all things to all people. He could appeal to the nationalist right, who have been a key plank in Putin's coalition of support. He could appeal to Western governments and business with neoliberal economics, and he could appeal to the Russian working class tired of extreme inequality. Although it should be noted on this last point, his economic populism is highly aesthetic. He would criticize the opulent wealth of the elites compared to harsh conditions of Russia's working poor. However, he is against a redistribution of this wealth, and against resolving the post-Soviet criminal privatizations of the 90s that saw state assets given out like candy to whoever was corrupt enough and powerful enough to be in the right place at the right time. He would simply implement a tax on the oligarchs to justify their wealth that wasn't theirs to claim in the first place, which really undermines any legitimacy of the claim that he was an anti-corruption campaigner. How exactly can you be called anti-corruption when you are happy to leave all the corruption in place exactly as it is, just with you in charge instead of the current guy? In the wake of his death, Western politicians have sought to use him as a rallying cry for continued efforts to support Ukraine, including Zelensky himself. But this is yet another instance of Navalny as all things to all people. Navalny had actually spoken of a need for Russia to hold economic and military dominance over its neighbor, and while he said the seizure of Crimea violated international laws, he was opposed to returning it to the Ukrainians. Only after Vlad's 2022 invasion, while Navalny was locked up as a political prisoner, having survived an assassination attempt and aware of the necessity to maintain Western support for his survival, would he then suggest Ukraine should have the territorial integrity it was guaranteed in 1991 after the breakup of Soviet states. There has been so little nuance in the discourse surrounding Navalny, not only since his murder, but ever since he's been on the scene. He's always been described in Western outlets as a courageous warrior standing up to a tyrant, with very little mention of how Russia or the world would be better off with him in place of Putin. Navalny was a chameleon, and we can only speculate on what form he would have taken had he reached the summit of power. There is no real suggestion though that he would have been anything other than yet another cult of personality power player, balancing the various forces that he would need to keep himself there. Perhaps he would have embraced the neoliberal economics he began with, allowing Western capital to flood in and get their share of the Russian economy. Perhaps his ethno-nationalist flirtations would resurface, causing conflict between European Russians and the Muslim majority population in the North Caucasus. Or perhaps he would have been a super chill dude, who's to say? The point is, surely we've had enough experience now not to keep falling for the same stupid mistakes of supporting oppositional powers that might seem to suit our interests in the moment, but that don't offer a clear image of what shape they'll take once our immediate need for them has ceased. We actually used to think Putin seemed like a pretty swell guy, until he wasn't. He spoke of corruption and the need for public freedoms much like Navalny does now. Even though I think there's no reason to believe Navalny would have been an improvement on Vladimir Putin. If you have assessed the facts and think while he was very problematic, he might have still been a marginal improvement, the lesser of two evils argument we're all so familiar with. I'd have no problem with that, I guess. Reasonable people can come to the conclusion Navalny is less evil than Putin, that's fine. I still think it's risky to actively support someone like that when you have no idea where the chips will fall, but hey. You're entitled to your opinion. But what's going on here is not a lesser evil style thing. This is unabashed ideological glamorization of a fallen hero, a Harvey Dent style symbol of a pure-hearted man standing up to a corrupt system. I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised by our admiration for Navalny. He is truly the archetype of a modern Western politician. A pragmatic opportunist whose words mean less than the please re-rack your weight signs at the gym, or land acknowledgements for indigenous people. Whatever gloss they have on their image, be it a bold vision of a progressive future, or a return to the glory of an imagined past, underneath they're neoliberals cozying up to the financial elite that ultimately grant consent for their rule. I have no doubt that if Navalny was born into a Western political context, he would have thrived. Unencumbered by an adversary with an iron grip on power, his shape-shifting abilities could have taken him all the way to the top.
One night, a young internet blogger called Alexei Navalny got up on a platform and he chanted the phrase that redefined Russia. Putin was furious. He had given the new Russian middle classes prosperity. Now they were stabbing him in the back.
Putin's first visit to the West as president should have been an auspicious one. The demonstrators have accused Putin's army of human rights abuses and torture in Chechnya. But Putin wasn't perturbed by the Downing Street protests as he met the British Prime Minister. Tony Blair urged the West not to isolate Russia over Chechnya.
Well, let me say first, I think President Putin, I think he is fully capable of building a prosperous, strong Russia while preserving freedom and pluralism and the rule of law. I think he's fully capable of doing it.
The people who killed your sons, he told the families, were the corrupt elites in Moscow. The oligarchs who have all the money.
No.
Okay. Я вам очень благодарен за этот вопрос.
I'm extremely grateful for this question.
Аудитория начала с этого вопроса.
We had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea to create a force of mujahideen, and we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye.
But in Russia, there was a group of men who had seen how this very lack of belief in politics and dark uncertainty about the future could work to their advantage. What they had done was turn politics into a strange theatre, where nobody knew what was true or what was fake any longer.